Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, from Kemp Memorial Stadium. Welcome to WETV's videotape of the 4th annual Black Diamond Cavalcade High School Band Competition, sponsored by the Shamokin Area High School Band and Orchestra Boosters Association. I'm Ron Zimmerman, Program Director, and at this time I'd like to introduce to you the host commentator for the show tonight, a gentleman whose band unfortunately was scheduled to appear, but due to administrative difficulties was forced to cancel. And I'm speaking of Mr. Sam Ravito, band director for the Southern Columbia Area High School Marching Band.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to make one quick correction due to the fact that there are 2 athletic events scheduled tonight at Southern Area. It was almost impossible. It was impossible to bring the band this evening. I would like to apologize deeply to Mr. Cooper and the Band Boosters Association from Shamokin, and we hope that we get down here next year. Now, ladies and gentlemen, entering the field is the Our Lady of Lourdes Marching Band under the direction of Mr. Frank Mahoney. This year's band consists of 95 members in total, 52 playing members, 20 flags, 8 rifles, 8 majorettes, 2 sabers, an honor guard of 4, plus the field major. During the past 2 seasons, the Red Raider Marching Band has placed second in Chapter 2 finals and has advanced to the Atlantic Coast Championship, placing 5th in 1974 and 5th in 1975. This unit has also appeared in the International Blossom Festival in Ontario during the 1974 and 1975 seasons. This year's instructional staff, headed by band director Frank Mahoney, consists of Mr. Noble Canar, John Thull, Ralph Edwards, Jane Shalongo, and Lisa Buggetti as band instructors. The student administration includes Field Major Luann Rosini, band captain Mary Ellen Moen, and section leaders Ann Snadicki, Peggy Stahl, and Pete Supsick. This year's show will come off the line with Popeye the Drunken Sailor and the Russian Sailor's Dance. Going in to a drum solo featuring with the tune Move, followed by Buddy Rich's Space Shuttle. In concert, the band performs a work by jazz composer Chuck Mangione entitled The Legend of the One-Eyed Sailor, which is followed by the finale production based on Sunny. Judging this year will be based on 25 points for marching and maneuvering, 15 points for marching execution, 10 points for music analysis, general effect front, general effect music, and a total general effect of 15 points. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we are proud to present for you the Our Lady of Lourdes Red Raider Marching Band under the direction of Mr. Frank Mahoney. As they leave the field, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call your attention to the judges in attendance tonight. The timing judge is Mr. William Wildmore of Hatfield, Pennsylvania. The marching and maneuvering judge, Mr. Frank McCormick from Levittown, Pennsylvania. And Mr. James Jimmo of Palmyra, New Jersey. Mr. Dominic Fulginiti of Newark, Delaware is the music judge. And Mr. Chuck Hager of Northampton, Pennsylvania is the music analysis. The general effect judges for this evening, for the front, Mr. Robert Muser, Sr. of Allentown, Pennsylvania. General effect for the music, Mr. James Minster of Media, Pennsylvania. And the overall general effect judge, Mr. James Preem of Easton, Pennsylvania. The tabulator is Mrs. Mita Prime, and the chief judge, Mr. Charles Hagan. Ladies and gentlemen, the Lock Haven Area High School Marching Bobcat Band. Ladies and gentlemen, the Lock Haven Area High School Bobcat Marching Band. Ladies and gentlemen, this evening's competition will be based on two groups of bands. The first group, which consists of Our Lady of Lourdes and the Lock Haven High School Band, are considered Group 1, based on 60 playing members or less. All bands are based on playing members. The front, majorettes, and honor guard have nothing to do with the categorizing of the bands. The second part of our competition this evening will be an open class consisting of bands of 61 players or over.
Quite a large expense involved, and only because of the generosity of our merchants are we able to produce the program. We hope that you will keep the program handy and use it as sort of a second yellow pages. Patronize these folks because they're certainly helping us. We also want to apologize to a few of the patrons whose names were inadvertently left out of the friends and patrons column. The next band taking the field
Intercepted on a goal line by
from Mifflinburg, the Mifflinburg area.
The next band, ladies and gentlemen, entering the field of competition from Mifflinburg, Pennsylvania, the Mifflinburg Area Wildcat Marching Band under the direction of Mr. Charles B. Emmerich. This year's band will come off the line with the theme from Jaws, then into the old familiar tune of I Got You Under My Skin. Next, the Great Gate of Kiev, Mussorgsky. The fanfare from the trumpet section leads into the familiar march of Them Basses. The concert number is an unusual arrangement of Greensleeves. The show is concluded with a medley of Johnny Comes Marching Home and America. The instructional staff of Mifflinburg Area High School consists of Mrs. Roseanne Coons and Mr. Nevin Garrett. The Mifflinburg Area High School Band will be competing in the open class along with Bald Eagle Nittany High School Band and the East Pensboro High School Band. The Group 1 competition, which consisted of Lock Haven and Our Lady of Lourdes, is complete, but there might be a chance that the Slatington High School Band may get here. They had bus troubles on the way over, and they are broken down on the highway somewhere, and there's a great possibility that they might be here, thus leaving the Group 1 competition unfinished.
to the 30 or
Ladies and gentlemen, the Mifflinburg Area Marching Wildcat Band. We just received word that the Slatington Area High School Band has just arrived. They had a little bus trouble, and they've just pulled into the stadium now. There will be a short 10 or 15-minute intermission in the competition to allow the Slatington High School Band to warm up and prepare for their show. Ladies and gentlemen, the next band entering the field, the Bald Eagle Nittany High School Band. The Slatington High School Band is not ready yet to perform. They just arrived a few minutes ago. So we will continue with the open class competition with the Bald Eagle Nittany High School Band. The Slatington High School Band will appear next in competition. The Bald Eagle Nittany High School Band is under the direction of Mr. Paul Kellerman, with Mrs. Barbara Pallas, Majorette Advisor, Miss Cindy Hanna, Color Guard Advisor, and Mr. Terry Oakes, Drumline Instructor. The band's musical repertoire this year will consist of The Great Gate of Kiev off the line, followed by The Stars and Bars and George Kenny's Coat of Arms March. Next, the band performs a flash drill to the rock tune Gangbusters by Robert Foster, with backfield and re-entry to the theme from Brahms' First Symphony. Following next will be a percussion interlude. The band will present Mason Williams' hit Classical Gas as a concert number. The exit and color presentation is staged to a melody of the well-known Hallelujah Chorus and the Battle Hymn of the Republic. The band is dressed in black and white and consists of 75 musicians with 32-member front. The student leadership is provided by Corey Spots, the drum major, Cindy Butler, majorette captain, Kathy Gordon, flag captain, and Sue Hills, the rifle captain. As you already know, ladies and gentlemen, due to the cancellation of the show Saturday evening, there were 4 bands unable to attend the competition this evening. Northern York County, Milton High School, and New Oxford High School, and Southern Columbia Area High School were unable to attend due to conflicts either in athletics or administration. And some of the schools, being a school night tomorrow, a school day tomorrow, did not make the trip because of the great distance they had to travel to come to Shamokin. The Bald Eagle Nittany High School Band will be in competition along with Mifflinburg and East Pensboro. They will not be competing against the Our Lady of Lourdes and the Lock Haven High School Band. They are considered Class 2 band. They consist of 75 musicians, which puts them in the second grouping. Remember, the first grouping consisted of only 60 or less musicians, and the other groups in competition consist of 61 or more. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the Bald Eagle Nittany High School Marching Band. Ladies and gentlemen, the Bald Eagle Nittany High School Marching Band. As they leave the field, ladies and gentlemen, the next band in competition will be the Slatington High School Band. If you are wondering what the guns are for, each show is required to go a minimum of 10 minutes, and after 10 minutes, a gun is sounding, telling the band that they have 2 minutes left to get off of the field. No show can last any more than 12 minutes. Anything over 12 minutes is penalty points for that band.
Runners for the judges are members of the Shamokin area band front. Thank you very much, girls.
You can't afford a jacket. You can't afford a jacket.
Number 23, Mark Sheriff's in there with Frank.
Now entering the field, ladies and gentlemen, the Slatington Area High School Band, which will be classed in the Group 1 competition along with Our Lady of Lourdes and the Lock Haven High School Band. The opening of the Slatington High School Band is taken from the Olympics, The Bugler's Dream, followed by Around the World in 80 Days, featuring Tom Yenser and Mike Peters as trumpet soloists. Next, The Sound of Philadelphia, better known as TSOP, the theme from Soul Train, will be featured next in the repertoire of Slatington High School. Following TSOP, the Latin sounds of La Virgen de la Macarena, better known as the Bullfighter Song. Next, the woodwind section is featured with the Clarinet Polka. The concert selection is the Russian Saber Dance, which will feature the Saber Corps. Next, the Poor People of Paris and Chop Suey from the Flower Drum Song will add a little Oriental spice to Slatington's show. The program concludes with a Jewish sounding To Life taken from The Fiddler on the Roof, followed by the color presentation, This Is My Country. The instrumental staff of the Slatington High School Band, the band director is Mr. George P. Fennell, the band front advisor, Harry Kristen, Silks director, Sue Martin, weapons director, Sandy Lorman, color guard director, Wendy Christine, drum majors, Annette Beers and Donald Redline, majorette captain, Kathy Roberts, flash flag captain, Lori Dorward, rifle company captain, Kathy Jones and Suzanne Summers, silk captain, Marianne Jones. The Slatington High School Band consists of 58 members and a 53-member flag front. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the Slatington Area High School Bulldog Marching Band.
earlier. Anytime you have Johnny Devereaux spread out,
Ladies and gentlemen, the Slatington Area High School Marching Band. That concludes, ladies and gentlemen, the Class 1 competition between Lock Haven, Our Lady of Lourdes, and the Slatington High School Band. Ladies and gentlemen, on Monday, November 22nd, the Shamokin Band will present their fall concert at the Shamokin High School Auditorium. Tickets are available from any band member or the next band in competition, ladies and gentlemen, the East Pensboro Marching Panther Band. This band consists of 126 musicians and a 55-member band front. The band is under the direction of David Hackenberg and Nathan Ward, assisted by Clarence Hodges. Special part-time instruction is given by Skip Rizzuto, drill flags and rifles. Mrs. Bonnie Panbaker, instructor of the majorettes. Paul Tithel, percussion instructor, and Larry Hirschman, general effects and drill consultant. The 1976 Panther Band is under the field direction of Linda Panabaker. The feature twirler is Karen Schutt, and the saber captain is Carrie Hildebrand. Musical soloists for some of their selections will be John Price and Phil Magaro, who will be featured in the kickoff Cuiada, which is a Spanish rendition. Following this will be a jazz tune entitled Temptation. Following Temptation will be Alexander's Ragtime Band, and then the band pauses to remember one of the great American jazz musicians, Louis Armstrong. Our American heritage is highlighted in the color presentation, the Battle Hymn of the Republic. The band exits with the nostalgic The Way We Were. The East Pensboro Marching Band has been a consistent winner in the past. They have placed first in musical competitions and been named Class B champions at the Middle Atlantic States Marching Band Championship in 1972 and 1973. In 1975, the band placed first in Cedar Cliff and Lower Dauphin contest, competing in the Class A division of the Cavalcade of Bands State Championship at Veterans Stadium, Philadelphia. The band again took top musical honors. With the conclusion of the East Pensboro show, that will conclude the Class B competitions, or the second group competition consisting of Bald Eagle Nittany, Mifflinburg, and East Pensboro. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the East Pensboro Area High School Band. Ladies and gentlemen, the East Pensboro Marching Band. Ladies and gentlemen, the East Pensboro Marching Band. That concludes our competition for the evening. If you would like to take a guess at home who you think won the competition, in Class A, we had Our Lady of Lourdes, Lock Haven, and Slatington High School bands. And in Class B, or Group 2, we had Mifflinburg, Bald Eagle Nittany, and finally East Pensboro.